What's up, guys? It's KB. Make sure you subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. Click the bell icon down below so you don't miss a single video from us. And thanks for tuning in to another video from Underground Sports Philadelphia. Now let's get into it.
Philadelphia, baby, you're gonna love it. Best sports fans in the world. Actually, the worst, but that's what makes them the best.
Welcome back to Top Bins, the show bringing you all the action from England and Italy. I'm your host, Matt. Not joined by my usual co-host, Dom. I am joined by my usual co-host for a different show, Kyle. Kyle, how are you?
I am, as you say on our different show, living the dream.
We had a total role reversal here. Wow, this feels very bizarre. Dom could not record tonight, so we're rolling with Kyle. We're going to be rolling through what was an interesting last weekend in SerieA, in the Premier League. We are on international break mode. Next week, too, we'll have something a little fun cooked up for you for next week's episode as we roll through the last tune-ups before the World Cup. It's the last time we'll be interrupted before our month-and-a-half break in domestic action for the World Cup, which, by the way, is rolling faster and faster. Only 2 months away now from that. So, yeah, last time that we'll have a break, we'll have a lot of soccer in between now and then. Let's rewind the clocks a little bit. Let's look at this past weekend. We'll start in Italy because this is where the biggest storylines came from. First one being Monza 1, Juventus 0. Crazy story because obviously Monza, this is their first ever season in Serie A in the top flight in Italy. This is their first ever win in Serie A as against Juventus, a team that has obviously historically dominated Serie A, especially over the last decade, have won so many titles. We know that this isn't the same Juventus team, but Monza getting their first win. Palladino, their manager, this was his first game as manager, and it is a win, and it is Monza's first win. So maybe that's an interesting piece of trivia if you're ever in bar trivia sometime in the future. You'll be able to pull that one out of your hat. For Juventus, though, that's really where I think a lot of the storyline points to from this game because, Kyle, this is a bit of a problem. Juventus has started very slowly this year. A team that typically, too, has higher expectations than this. They've lost both their Champions League games. They've had one of their worst starts to a domestic season in some time. Gotta imagine, even as a guy who doesn't know much about soccer, that the head coach, the manager in the situation would be a little bit of a crossfire, a little bit.
That's tough. That's not the ideal way that you want, the perception of a club such as Juventus to be in the public spotlight.
Right. So here's the problem, and I will spell this out for you, the listener, and for Kyle, too, because Kyle could probably use some context. Juventus, they cannot fire Allegri because of financial difficulties. That is the issue here. They would like, I think, to fire Allegri. In fact, there's a lot of interdivision, it seems, with some of the board members, some of the guys who work in the administration staff, some of the more front office people. There seems to be some sort of division within the camp. No one really seems to be advocating necessarily for Allegri in this situation. People just seem to be advocating more for we just gave him a 5-year contract and can't really afford to pay him off, and everyone else is like, well, this is a sinking ship and we should probably get off of it while we can, while there are still options out there. In this game too, Monza, you see this sometimes across all sports, the underdog with kind of this. Monza dominated this game, fully deserving of the 3 points. It was certainly, I think, Juventus' worst performance of the season in so many different ways. This attack has not looked good, and that has obviously not been one of Allegri's strengths over the course of his career. He's a guy that has depended a lot on world-class talent. Kyle, if I could give a good American sport kind of persona, he would be a Bill Belichick type, and that he's always been surrounded, obviously was attached so long to Tom Brady. Allegri never had a player quite like that, but has always had talented players around him. He's definitely a defensively kind of oriented coach, a little bit more old school, pays attention to the things kind of on the periphery, like Bill Belichick does with weird special teams habits that he has. That's the closest comparison. I think he's not quite doesn't have the reverence that I think Bill Belichick has around him. He doesn't necessarily have that aura that he does, but is an accomplished manager, has won a lot. But this is a team similar to the Patriots that have kind of lost that golden touch. A team that was typically seen as this very unbeatable, going away to Juventus anytime they came to you. It was always going to be a tough game. Hasn't quite been that so far, and that's concerning if I'm a Juventus fan.
I was going to say, before you said, nobody really campaigning for him, it almost sounds like Doc Rivers.
You know what? I think for our Philly listeners, yep, there's some Doc Rivers. There's some Doc Rivers in the Allegri stuff.
Except I don't know if Allegri's on Twitter or not.
I don't believe he is. A few managers are, and it's always funny because I do follow a few, and I read their tweets. I'm like, man, like you're so introspective. Like, how do you? It's so funny, but the difference between some European managers and American head coaches and the things they do in their spare time versus some of these guys. It's just very different. I think too. It's funny you bring up the Doc Rivers thing because both of them I think have very obvious weaknesses, and it's very apparent to a lot of fans of the Sixers, right? That there are weaknesses that Doc Rivers has. There's blind spots that he has, and it's the same with a lot of Juventus fans and Allegri. And it just feels like a relationship that is circling the drain in a lot of ways, and I don't know how it continues comfortably. And I've been a person too that is, in a lot of ways, defended Allegri over the years. I think he's gotten, in years gone by, a little bit more disservice than maybe he's deserved. This year, though, I think the complaints and the criticism is a little more fair and a little more spot on because of just I think you have to adapt, and you come back, sign this big long-term deal, and the fact that you've not been able to really noticeably improve the squad, you can't depend on having the absolute best players all the time available. Look at Milan last year, struggling through injury, and again, a squad that didn't cost a ton of money to assemble winning the title. That's the type of stuff that you just have to be able to do. That's the things that you have to be able to do now. You have to be able to work a little bit just beyond your budget, especially in Italy where teams aren't spending a ton of money to begin with. It's strange, I just think Allegri in another year, where he doesn't have this extension, he's probably gone already, and they're using this international break to find his replacement. Maybe someone like De Zerbi, who went to Brighton to replace Graham Potter, is actually going to Juventus, but obviously not meant to be. And we'll see. Thomas Tuchel is still out there, so he will be the beautiful woman at the bar that I think a lot of teams unhappy with their manager will be eyeballing from across the room. To see if they should be making a move.
And I'm looking at the link you sent, for this game, in my opinion, from an outsider perspective looking in, that really only kind of pays attention to the Union in terms of, my soccer knowledge. I mean, you said Monza dominated this game. Their ball movement was insane. Looking at the amount of total passes, 576 to 378, that's just setting Juventus up for failure, that their ball movement was just absolutely abysmal compared to their opponent.
Yeah, I can't stress this enough. Monza are a team that literally have never been in the top division. This was their first ever win in SerieA. This is a team that 5 years ago was still dwindling in the lower leagues of Italy. So their ability to dominate it as maybe not as good as Juventus have been over the past few seasons compared to their previous level. To see a newly promoted team just completely control the game against a regular in Serie A is shocking no matter what. Obviously, Juventus had a red card, which didn't help, of course. Angel Di Maria picking that one up for just a really stupid elbow as well. I think in the age of VAR and video review, you have to be aware of anything like that. Even if it doesn't get picked up on the field, someone's going to tell that guy to take a look at that elbow you just threw and get you sent off. So, Monza did well to control the game. And what's deeply ironic too is there are a few players in this Monza team that were on loan for Juventus that put the needle through the heart, I think, so to speak. And really sunk their season, at least in the early stages. We'll move on to Milan 1, Napoli 2. A huge game. I mean, two teams that we expect to be potentially fighting for the title. These were two teams last season that were fighting for the title, at least until the springtime when it really became Milan and Inter Milan. Napoli fell off a little bit, especially in April. But Napoli have enjoyed a really, really strong start to the SerieA campaign. Again, this year, the last two seasons, they've started out strongly through their first 10, 12 games. They've typically been, if not at the top of the table, right at the top of the table. The struggle for them has been in those later stages of the season and staying healthy, number one, and just staying consistent, getting those consistent results. That has certainly been a weakness of theirs. You play them in the early stages, though, you better watch out because they'll definitely burn you. They reclaim the top spot in SerieA. They go back to top of the table with a big, big away win to Milan. Milan did not play terribly in this game, but I will say the biggest issue, and Kyle, I'm sure you can see it as well, 22 shots to 9 in favor of Milan, yet they lose the game. Really just inefficient scoring, inefficient finishing, which has definitely plagued Milan in a lot of different situations this season so far, especially. They didn't have Rafa Leao for this game, and that's obviously a big miss. He's been a player that Kyle, being the producer of the show, has heard me and Dom wax lyrical about quite a bit. Leao would I think maybe have made a little difference in this game. Milan did have a chance very late to at least make it 2-2. Shot went off the crossbar. And this, Kyle, Milan lost 3 straight home games in SerieA to Napoli for the first time since 1979. Napoli have just had their number. Has not been since 2014, actually, that Milan had beaten Napoli at the San Siro, their home stadium. So, crazy game. The first half was a little bit dull, a little bit dry, but the second half is where it opened up, and just a really exciting game. At the top of the table, and gave us a lot of entertainment.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up the shots and everything. Like a 22% conversion rate seems very high in the sport of soccer or football, wherever you're listening. That just seems like insanely high in terms of just the amount of opportunities you traditionally get versus the amount that you're actually able to convert because of how typically good goaltending is. 22%, that's the number that stuck out to me there for Napoli.
Yeah, they've done well to be that kind of efficient team so far this year. Their attack has certainly been their strong point, and it's funny too because they're missing Victor Osimhen, their star striker for this game through injury. So if any game you would have expected maybe a little bit of regression, in the attacking ability, it probably would have been this one. You didn't really totally see that. Kvaradona had another really strong game for Napoli and caused a lot of problems. Serginho Dest, our lovely American boy in Milan, 6 minutes into his Milan debut, gives away the penalty. Not particularly great. Not the best way to start your career. He'll have better days, I'm sure, but just on the subject too of finishing and where spots are, typically, if you're doing expected goals, the most high value places are going to be within the 6-yard box. Typically a shot there is going to have about a 50% chance of finding its way to the back of the net, which still, if you think about it, is not as much as people may think. I think a lot of people expect a shot from that area that close to be more in the 70s and 80s. The only thing that's close to that high is a penalty shot, which typically is about 76% chance of going in. That is the typical conversion rate of that. But yeah, most of your shots inside the box, inside that sweet area, are going to be roughly 17 to 28%, depending exactly where. So yeah, that conversion rate is good. That doesn't take into account too just that Napoli have some good finishers. I think so much of this game for me was about Napoli being in better form to start the season. Milan have been a little stop-start to start this season. They've not been consistently good necessarily like Napoli have been. Napoli now, top of the table again and just absolutely cruising through not even just SerieA, but we've seen it in their Champions League games. They've taken care of Liverpool. They've taken care of Rangers. And, just look like just a little bit more sharp, whereas Milan, again, have had some issues so far this year. I'm not worried about them because this was also, a similar result last season, and Milan were still able to win the title. We were talking about Napoli being title contenders into December last year, when they were top of the table. So Similar to a discussion we had on our main show about the NFL and how you can't draw too many conclusions after week 2. It's hard after we've played 7 games. That's a decent amount. You start to get to really understand these teams a little better. Start to see some trends, but it's September still. The season does not end until May. In late May this year too. So there's so much still left to happen. So much left to do that it's very hard to make any sort of wide sweeping claim now about Napoli, about Milan. I will just say that Napoli have really surprised and impressed me. I didn't particularly expect them to be this good this year. When we made our show predictions, I didn't have them even as a top 4 team. Granted, in my defense, that was before they made a lot of the transfers that they did. And but if I could take it back, I probably would, because they look really strong, and I expect, even if they don't win the title this year, expect them to be a team that finishes in the top 4 and we see in the Champions League again. Just that's the type of talent I think they have now that maybe wasn't as apparent in July.
Yeah, I mean, those are the squads that you're always kind of looking towards the top of the table in SerieA with Milan and with Napoli. So I mean, it's always going to be a bout with those two, and those are that's typically one of the big matchups that you and Dom are talking about on this show when it comes to top of the table standings and everything. So big win for Napoli to kind of get that early in the season. I think is big for them, while they're playing in the form that they're at. And then, like you said, I think Milan, they're not done. It's still very early for them, and they'll find a way to bounce back. Plus, they were down, one of their big boys.
Yeah, and you look at the table too, and you're still, I think it's still very tight. Napoli and Atalanta sitting top with 17 points, but even Milan sitting 5th with 14 points. Roma in 6th with 13 points. That's those are 2 weekends away from changing dramatically. From some just dropped results and dropped points. So still a lot of movement to be potentially had. And again, I'm not worried about either team in this situation. Maybe some worry here. Udinese 3, Inter Milan 1. Nico Barella had a beautiful free kick to start the game off. I was watching this while at work, 6:30 in the morning over the weekend. I'm kind of glad for the return of the very early games since I'm back to working weekends, because it gives me a little bit of something to do so early in the day. But yeah, Nico Barella, one of my favorite players in SerieA, of course, threading it into a top bins trademark, but canceled out by Udinese. He had to get a goal through an own goal in the first half, and then 2 late goals to steal all 3 points. I shouldn't even say steal. Steal's a bad word for this game. I thought Udinese were deserving of the 3 points, and they have been so far. And this is a team that I think probably deserves a little more credit than they've been getting. 5-1-1 to start this season. Taking 16 points through their first 7 games. Gerard Delafeu with 5 assists so far this year. They've started off really strong, and you look at their underlying numbers too. It's not necessarily a fluke either. You look at their expected goals against. There's no big swings or variance there necessarily that make you think a little bit of overperformance here. They've played to this level, and we've seen teams in Serie A start up very strong and fade. That could certainly happen with Udinese. I would not be surprised if that happened. In fact, I would find it more probable than anything. We saw with Sassuolo in years past, where it is hard to keep that momentum and, that stamina through the course of the season when you consider how many teams just have deeper squads around them. But a big result for them. For Inter, similar to Juventus in that I think this maybe raises questions about Inter that they were not quite expecting. A little bit of over-reliance perhaps on the formation and the system, and maybe not being able to be a little more flexible and kind of adjust to the needs of a game. Really bizarre substitutions too. Taking guys off in the first half simply because they were on a yellow card feels like a bad call to me. Inzaghi has been a very conservative manager over the years with doing that. I guess the closest relation I can give to that is like a guy gets like 2 quick fouls in the first quarter of an NBA game, but then sits for like 3 quarters. It's just like, I get the idea. I get taking that guy off in that situation, but maybe maybe have a little longer leash and trust that they can handle themselves professionally and appropriately. Yeah, strange game for Inter, and I think it certainly makes Inzaghi's future a little murky. I think they expect to be doing a little better than this. He brought Gagliardini and DeMarco on in the 31st minute for Mkhitaryan and Bastoni. Two good players for Inter, too. It's not like these are guys that I particularly didn't think were doing anything wrong besides the yellow cards that they got. So just a strange decision all around by Inzaghi. And I think he's another manager that you can expect to hear a bit of news about in this international window, whether or not he's staying, going, fired, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the halftime scores, 1-1 at halftime, and then coming out of half, Udinese gets those 2 goals to get the win, and it just makes you wonder, like, what were those discussions at halftime, to try to keep it even, and then, like you said, were they too conservative to, really come out of halftime with any kind of juice? Because to give, in SerieA, in Premier League, to give up 2 goals at a halftime, it's usually pretty rare, I would say, unless, it's one of those, kind of onslaught type of games where everybody's just scoring, which are also very rare. But that kind of stood out to me, just seeing, Udinese to be able to make those adjustments at halftime and, kind of figure out the defense and, goaltending for Inter to go and get 2 extra goals in the second half. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and both the goals too, the first 2 goals for Udinese come off set pieces, and that has been a little bit of a discussion with Inter. Think of this like special teams in football, right? Where these are the ways that you can find margins over teams. I think the smart teams pay attention to this kind of stuff, and we talk about this a lot with Leicester, which is a team we'll talk about later in the show too. And that defensively and on these set pieces and free kicks, you have to have a plan, and so many smart teams now do. So many smart teams pay attention to these things that are maybe in the past haven't been as focused on as much, and you can find margins there. And Inter have struggled a little bit, I think, organizationally at the back on some of those situations, and that can be a problem for them, and that can be an area that teams exploit against them. They're also out without Romelu Lukaku for this, which is, I think, always going to be a little bit of a kind of asterisk for them. But, this is still a team that should be doing better in games like this. The expectation for Inter, for myself included, was that they'd be, winning the title this season. They have not really looked like a consistent enough team to win the title. I've seen flashes from them that have still, instilled me with that same belief that I had about them. But Inzaghi's decision-making has worried me a little bit. Again, some of the guys off that early for yellow cards, I can't get over it. It's such a bizarre choice. I would like to see him be a little more flexible tactically, and I know that has been a complaint even going back to his Lazio days, that he's not been able to adjust. And I know he's caught some heat from some other public figures for maybe not doing that this past week in Italy. So we'll see. Just looking at the table now as we go into the international break. Napoli, like we said, sit top. Atalanta sit top as well. Technically second, of course, but they're both on 17 points. But they are second because of goal differential. But 2 teams that we really, to be honest, I would have been surprised if you had told me those were our top 2 teams going into this international break. Because especially Atalanta have surprised me. With the results, they got a pretty big win over Roma. Roma certainly did enough to win the game, but just could not finish their chances. Atalanta, a little bit of a smash and grab for them, but listen, you take it however you can get it. So Atalanta have surprised me in a very good way to start the season. Udinese sitting in third with 16 points. Lazio in fourth with 14. Milan in fifth with 14. Roma in sixth with 13. That rounds up your European spots. Looking at the relegation spots, some names we kind of expected to see. We only now have 2 teams in Serie A, Kyle, that do not have wins. We've worked out the kinks. We've gotten no more 5 or 6 teams that haven't won. Now we're just down to 2. Just Cremonese and Sampdoria are the only 2 left that we're waiting on wins. But Monza, Cremonese, Sampdoria are your bottom 3 at the moment. Those would be the 3 teams going down. I would just like to take a victory lap and say that I thought Sampdoria would have a rough season. They had a bad year last year. It has not improved in any meaningful way this season. Really concerned for them. This is a team that has really been around in the top division for a very long time. I've had some bright moments in the past too. So it would be as Linus just walks directly. Come on, bud. Oh, man. That's what happens when you do it live. Sampdoria, a team that would be shocking to see get relegated. But we saw it with Genoa last season. A team that has been the mainstay in the SerieA going down. Cremonese, going to be honest, did not have high hopes for them. They're going along with my expectation. And Monza, I think this could maybe be the turnaround for them. Maybe that's wishful thinking because they just beat Juventus and you kind of want to hype them up a little bit. But I do think they have some talent there that they could use and find themselves getting out of this. But still very early, and you look at these teams, you look at the point totals. Again, 1 or 2 weeks of good form really changes everything about this season.
Yeah, and podcast aligned squad right in the middle. Sassuolo chilling in 11th. Not too bad for, just being middle of the pack.
Yeah, Sassuolo, interesting season too because obviously they've lost some key players. Scamacca, who I said should have stayed at Sassuolo for one more season, of course has not. Former manager De Zerbi is going to Brighton, which is exciting. I'm really, really excited to watch that actually. But yeah, Sassuolo have not been they've not been the high flyers this year. I'm gonna have to consult with Dom and see who the new podcast sons are going to be. It might have to be Udinese, honestly, just because maybe we'll just be the hipster. Pick the hipster team every year, the team that surprises everyone. And maybe Udinese are just that this season for us, at least in Italy. Shall we take a journey across the channel to England, where we started? Well, really in London too, because we were mourning the Queen. We're also mourning the loss of Leicester City 6-2 to Tottenham Hotspur here. Leicester, and I got to live. I'm bummed Dom's on the show because I was going to give him a lot of credit because he said he picked Leicester as one of his big underperformers for the season. I agreed with him. We were in total lockstep there, but he really put his name out there. Kyle, they've conceded 22 goals through 7 games. That's not great. The team with the next highest goals conceded total was Bournemouth, who have 19. Of course, Bournemouth lost 9-0 to Liverpool this season. So that, of course, really inflated their numbers. Without such a beating like that, maybe it wouldn't look as tough, in terms of goals conceded. Leicester, one of the worst teams in the division so far this year, showed just about everything wrong with them in this game, and that yes, they were able to create on the break at times, and they were able to create some good situations and were able to score some goals because we've seen that from this year. It's really not obviously the attack that we're worried about. It's the 22 goals. That's the real concern here, and that was the concern last season with them. Speaking of a team that like we were talking about a little bit with Inter with set pieces. Leicester are very much the same way. They're bad at these set pieces. I don't know what they're working on. I don't know what's going wrong there, but it just seems like simple organizational things are not happening. Brendan Rodgers had something very weird to say, and I don't know if this is just we saw like some Freudian slip by him, but he's the manager of Leicester and was talking about Leicester and he's talking about them climbing up the table. I'm sure they'll climb up the table. Weird to be talking about it in that sense. Usually when someone affiliated with the organization is speaking about that organization, they're saying we, us, all of us, not they. Maybe a little slip into the inner mind, the inner working of Brendan Rodgers, who Kyle is maybe most famous for when he managed Liverpool and in preseason. This is great because I love this because you don't have the context for this. You don't have the history with this. So I can get your true reaction to this. He's one of the most famous incidents was Liverpool had this like preseason documentary similar to like a Hard Knocks type of deal. And he, as a motivational tactic, had 3 envelopes in which he said that he put the names of players that would disappoint the team that season, and that was kind of just it. He just laid that on them, and I guess was supposed to motivate them to not be that player. Maybe a guy that just doesn't get the man management stuff all that much. This has been kind of typical for him. He's been a manager over the years that the first 2 seasons usually look pretty good, and he's had some success. He's won some things. He's won some trophies. He went to Celtic and won there and won the treble and a lot of good things there. But in his third season, started to fall away a bit. Liverpool, his third and fourth season is where it really started to crumble. And we're seeing that with Leicester, where again, you just get later into his tenure, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if this is a guy that I've always felt he operates better when the wind is going with him. Like he's a great manager to have when things are going well, but as soon as things, and it's so challenging in this sport too, and it's the same in so many sports, but especially here where every 2 or 3 years you really need to change the squad up. You really need to refresh. You really need to bring in new faces. You really can't have a year where you're not progressing forward in some way, because by staying stagnant and many times, you're actually falling behind because everyone around you is making big improvements, especially in the Premier League where there's so much money. Teams are spending and getting new players every single transfer window. Leicester weren't able to do that. They do have some financial troubles, but they're in a huge, huge mess right now because I'm not going to say that they're going to get relegated. I think there's a lot of season left, but it's hard to say when you have 1 point after 7 games that you have a lot of confidence in this team, because I don't have that confidence in them. I really do worry for them. If things don't start turning the right way, I would be a little surprised to see Brendan Rodgers, if at least by like the World Cup, is still manager at Leicester, because they play Nottingham Forest right after the break, which is a little bit of a derby, a little bit of a rivalry match as well. And both of them are sitting at the very bottom of the table. That could potentially be, as we might call it, a loser leaves town match. The manager of either team may not be returning, because there's been some news about some rumors, at least, about Steve Cooper from Nottingham Forest also potentially facing a little bit of the hot seat now. From the other direction, Spurs technically sitting, near the top of the table now, sitting in third spot with 17 points, tied to Manchester City. Those are the only 2 teams so far in England that have yet to lose a game this season. 6 goals. Youngmin's son comes off the bench, gets a hat-trick. He has started out the season a little bit slow and got benched, comes off the bench, and I think his reaction to the goals, he did a little bit of the shush, a little bit of the calm down type of stuff, a little bit of not as wild celebration, I think. More muted, and I think, I think in some ways a little bit of relief. He has not started out the season well. These were his first goals. A guy that has been a pretty consistent goal scorer throughout his time at Spurs, especially the last few seasons, where he's really improved, taking those leaps forward. If Youngmin starts getting on form and starts scoring goals like that, I do worry about this Spurs team and where they might end up, because that could be really dangerous. But all around a good weekend for them, a big win against a team that I think they have some unexercised demons from years gone past in the title race.
He seems like one of the general public, just like fan favorite players.
Yes, he is definitely he's definitely like you're right. Like a neutral's kind of like favorite guy. I'm a little like more sour on Son.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, he also, people tend to, I think, overlook that he's done some dirty things in his career. He's got a few red cards, and they haven't been totally undeserved either. He's got a little, which I like, though. I like that he's a little edge to his game, but he's crossed
He feels
the line.
like that guy too, that if you're a fan of Spurs, you love him, and if your team is playing against them, you fucking hate him.
That is true. That is more true of Richarlison. Richarlison is the symbolism of that phrase. I love this. I love this word for it. They call players like him a shithouse, and say that he engages in shithousery, which is just my favorite. Like listen, like Shakespeare has lived on in some ways in the eyes, in like the hearts and minds of British people, because they do just every now and again they come up with just the right word to describe a person or a situation, and just shithousery is maybe one of my favorites. Yeah, Richarlison, I think, is really emblematic of that. He absolutely loved to root for Richarlison if he's on your team. I've hated him pretty much his entire career because he was at Everton for a decent spell. And just always seemed to be a guy that, I don't know, took a studs up challenge into someone's knee or something, and loves a little dive every now and again. But
Little
I
Albert
see,
Hainsworth action.
yes, you can, like, I see the appeal. I see why people would like him. It's a little Ndamukong Suh like, or he's great, and he's got some good moments, but don't look at the negative highlight reels too much. So for Leicester, big questions, coming out of this game, and will continue into the international break. The problem is too, like I said, financially, this club has some big issues, and those are not going to be resolved overnight or over the international break. So worrying times for Leicester, for sure.
And they seem
Very
like a
worrying
club
times.
too, Matt, that, like, from my perspective, like, everybody talked about them, obviously, when they had their big splash and everything, and it seems like they've just pumped as much money as possible into the team to stay above water, and now the water's starting to kind of, reach their mouths and their noses, and they're starting to not be able to tread too lightly in the Premier League.
And that is exactly the situation that they found themselves in. There's also new financial rules coming in to the next few years about the amount of wage to turnover losses that you're allowed to have. And Leicester are sort of prepping for that because they're actually taking, like you said, they've taken on a lot of losses over the last few years. They paid a lot of money to keep some of their more like high profile players at the club. And that comes with some risk. And they're not in a position where they were able to spend a lot of money this summer. They weren't able to sign players. There were some issues too. I think they maybe expected one or two players to move, and maybe maybe they were expecting some other teams to come in with some bids that maybe never quite materialized, or maybe weren't in the amounts that they were expecting. And that could have maybe thrown some of their plans off. But yes, like that is definitely the issue for them, is that they've spent big to kind of get where they're at and have not been able to maintain the success, I think, in the way that they expected to, and now find themselves in a little bit of a hole. It's always dangerous, when you do that, because the two teams we'll talk about next, Everton and West Ham, can certainly tell you that spending freely and spending without care, you got to pay the bill sometime. and the River Styx man collects his toll no matter what. This was Everton 1, West Ham 0. Everton, you got to love them. Get their first win of the season. Frank Lampard getting one over on West Ham. West Ham have started out also pretty disappointing. 4 points through 7 games, sitting in the relegation spots. There's 3 teams that have been sort of established mid and upper mid-table, like top half of the table teams over the last, I'd say like 4 or 5 years in the Premier League. West Ham have had like a threat of relegation in one of those years, but obviously stayed up. And Wolves, for the most part, have been good. But Wolves, West Ham, and Leicester, all right near the bottom of the table. West Ham and Leicester both being in the relegation spots. Wolves just barely above them. Really concerning for some of these mainstays that we've had in the Premier League the last few years, and the trend that they are on. West Ham, going back to last season, have actually been really terrible. Really concerned about their form now. They did not look good in this game. David Moyes has obviously been a manager that it's funny because when he was at Everton, I think he was at Everton for quite some time. I don't remember the exact years, but this was a guy that certainly overachieved in a lot of situations. He was like the ceiling raiser, if you will, the floor raiser of a team that wasn't spending necessarily as much. They were still spending money, but weren't spending as much as maybe some other clubs, and were still finding avenues of success. And eventually, moved on to take the Manchester United job when Sir Alex Ferguson left. Did not go so well, and since then has sort of fumbled through certain jobs, certain appointments. Found a little bit of a career revival at West Ham. Last year gets them to the Europa League semifinals, isn't able to obviously get them to that final. They sort of end the season disappointingly. Since then, since reaching that semifinal, they've been, frankly, a terrible team. They have not been good at just about anything. One of their star players, Declan Rice, has certainly not looked good this year. Typically a guy that you can expect to be a good ball carrier, ball progressor, good passer. The decision making has not been there this year. It seems like he's had like a different role. He's not been doing a lot of those ball progressions like I'm talking about. So a lot of concern there. For Everton, it's a good win. Finally get the win. 7 games into the season. They don't care really how it comes, and Neil Mopai gets his first goal as an Evertonian. Good for them in a sense because I think they came into the season with a lot of pressure. It'll give them, I think, a lot of belief that they can actually survive the season.
Yeah, I mean, last year it was good, maybe 2-3 month stretch on this show that you guys were on Everton relegation watch, and it was one of those things where like, is it gonna happen? Because it would have been historic if that happened, and like you said, giving them that confidence that they can, kind of stay above water, get that first win out of the way here. I think that's huge for them, and something that it seems like they kind of need after the season that they had last year and kind of the slow start that they've been off to this year.
Yeah, Richarlison obviously left this summer, and I think there's big holes to fill there. I don't know that I'm convinced that they've filled that yet. I think sometimes surviving in a league can be about just finding 3 teams worse than you. It's like the old saying about you don't have to outrun the bear, you have to outrun the slowest person in your group. You don't always have to be the 10th best team in the league. You just have to not be one of the 3 worst.
Right.
And that's all that it takes sometimes. Still, yeah, like I said, though, still worried about their goal output. They've only scored 5 goals this season, and they haven't looked particularly creative in a lot of ways. That's going to be a continual problem for them. They have a pretty decent defensive record, though. They've certainly been able to limit opposition chances. They've been able to sort of at least operate a little better defensively. I think that's one thing you can definitely say about Frank Lampard that he's been able to do, because we saw similar types of thing with Everton last year where he was at least able to get them to earn some clean sheets to kind of stop the bleeding that they were really shipping a lot of goals last year. But good to see them, I think, pick up 3 points. It's an interesting weekend in the Premier League because obviously we still had some fixtures postponed. Still no clear insight on when those will be made up. Hard to really say. It's going to be, Lord knows, whenever there's an opportunity. Because this season was already going to be compact. It was already going to be fast-paced. Now you're adding in some unaccounted for games. That's obviously going to make it a struggle. Elsewhere in the Premier League, Arsenal won 3-0 over Brentford. They go top of the table, reclaim that spot for Manchester City, who beat Wolves 3-0. Kevin De Bruyne, Kyle, is the top goal scorer at Wolves' home stadium in the calendar year 2022. That's not good. It's never good when a guy that's only played there twice has scored more goals than any of your team's players have through the calendar year. That's not great. So Wolves, maybe start scoring some goals. That might help. That would be my advice, at least. That's what I would do in that situation. We had a newly promoted battle as well on Friday night. Fulham winning 3-2 over Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest turns out buying 21 players and trying to incorporate them within the team might have some mixed results. It might be a little challenging. Maybe a little challenging to do that. Aston Villa set their season a little more straight with a 1-0 win over Southampton. These are the types of games that Aston Villa actually need to be winning this year. Obviously, it feels good when they get those good results against a team like Manchester City, but really what they need to be doing is beating teams like Southampton, if they want to kind of progress in the way they want, which is to be a top half of the table type of team. Just looking at the table now, Arsenal, like I said, sitting top with 18 points. They have looked strong to start the season. Manchester City in second with 17. Spurs in third with 17. Brighton Hove Albion still holding on to Champions League spots. They sit fourth with 13 points and a game in hand. Manchester United sitting fifth with 12. Fulham, 11 points in sixth spot. Chelsea and Liverpool, 10 and 9 respectively. Didn't see either of those teams play this weekend as well. And Chelsea will be a little bit new look. And your relegation spots, like I said, West Ham, Nottingham Forest, Leicester City, taking up those spots as we go into our international break. I think Nottingham Forest were my pick before the season to go down. I still feel reasonably confident that this is a team that could be going down still. Leicester, I saw them having, similar to Dom, I saw them having a bad season. I really did not expect to see them in the relegation spots. But now that they're there, now that they've had this start that they've had, it's not going to be easy to claw themselves out of this hole. And this team as well isn't as talented as maybe you'd like them to be, or as maybe as what is kind of publicly perceived to be. They have some stars for sure, but outside of that, if you look at like the makeup of the other 7 or 8 players on this team, it's not particularly amazing. And West Ham occupying one of those spots, I'd be very surprised if West Ham go down. But if you're looking for manager watch here, if you're looking for guys to be fired, Brendan Rodgers, Steve Cooper, even David Moyes, Bruno Lage, should definitely be concerned. I think about the direction now and where they're headed. Because I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if one of those names is not with us post international break.
How are we feeling about your boys?
Well, it's always good when you haven't had to watch them for like 2 weeks. That's always a good feeling. I got to say, the Queen passing at the time she did is actually kind of helpful. Liverpool really needed like a month to just not torture me. Yeah, I mean, it has not been a good start to the season. Of course, certainly not in line with I think the expectations of what we were thinking about for Liverpool this season, but. Part of that has been injury-based. Part of that, too, there's just been not good enough performances. Did win against Ajax in the Champions League, which was a big win. Certainly gets them back in the group and stops it from being a much harder hill for them to climb. I was disappointed we didn't obviously get the Wolves game and didn't get the game against Chelsea. So we'll have to wait and see for that. And, you look at the fixtures when come back from international break, and there's some good ones there. And, I struggle with Liverpool this season. It felt like it was going to be a transition year to begin with, and it has not gone maybe as smooth as we would like. But I'm still confident that they'll turn it around. I have a lot of faith in them. And listen, even if they don't, I've seen worse seasons. So you know what? I've gotten my Premier League title. I've gotten my Champions League. I've gotten all the cups. You know what? Whatever happens now is like a free hit to me. I'll live with it. I've lived through worse. I've seen much worse. But I've seen the pearly gates at least once. I've seen the rainbows across the sky. So that's all that matters now. I've punched my ticket at least once.
Did you? I saw this pop across my timeline today. I figured I'd ask if you saw. Did you see the Aubameyang video clip with him and his family and his Chelsea kit?
I did not.
I will send this to you right now so we get a live reaction. Someone basically tweeted the clip and said, "Wonder what Arsenal fans are feeling seeing this video clip."
What's hilarious is Aubameyang, of course. Here we go. That's a tough scene. So obviously, like Arsenal and Chelsea, pretty big rivals, London rivals, and a lot of bad blood between the two of them. Aubameyang, hilariously, fell out with the Arsenal manager Arteta. They end up just buying out his contract. Essentially, like they just rather pay him off to leave. He goes to Barcelona for 6 months, gets them back into the Champions League, has a pretty good spell there. And then over the summer, Chelsea like, hey, why don't you come back? And he there he is. He's back in Chelsea. Part of the appeal too is that he was going to work with Thomas Tuchel, a manager that he had worked with before and had some success with. And he gets fired like 5 days later. So that's the way it goes. That's the fast-paced nature of the game as it was.
Gotta love it. Gotta love that.
Yeah, so I'm sure Arsenal fans, I think Arsenal fans in general have not reacted too poorly to that. I think a lot of it has been, a health. I think Arsenal, if they were in a worse position, I think so much of that healthy perspective that they've had has been because of the fact that they've started out the season so well. I think Aubameyang going to Chelsea, if maybe the roles were reversed, Chelsea were sitting top of the table and Arsenal were sitting somewhere a little more close to the mid-table, maybe the feelings will be a little more hurt. But I think largely speaking, Arsenal fans have been pretty much non-bothered by it. But I think that's it, Kyle. I think you know what, you did great. You filled in for Dom, fantastic. Not an easy switch, not an easy person to replace, but I think you did well.
I do what I can. When the bad signal is thrown out, I step up to the plate and try my best. But it's always interesting. Producing this show, you learn a lot, and I've certainly learned a lot since Top Bins has been back now, and it's been very enjoyable to kind of just have that back of the pocket knowledge of everything going on in Premier League and SerieA. So kind of have learned the tricks of the trade from the both of you.
And there you have it. And I hope you, dear listeners, have learned some of those tricks as well. It was a great weekend. It was a lot of fun. I'm bummed that we're on an international break because, especially when the World Cup is as close as it is, it feels like such a tease. It's such a tease to have it. But there are some big games, to look out for. Some Nations League games too. If you want to thumb through those, please do at your pleasure, or just take a little tolerance break from the soccer. Maybe just relax a little bit off of it. Enjoy what will be one of the very few weekends without wall-to-wall coverage of something for most of this year. We'll be back next week. Dom should be rejoining us next week too. We'll have something a little fun planned. We'd like to get a little creative with our international break episode. So we'll cook something up for next week, a little interesting to look at and discuss. And then we'll be right back at it. The domestic leagues will be back. We'll have Champions League right back, and before we'll be previewing the World Cup. Until then, for Kyle, for me, myself, Matt, my cat Linus, we will talk to you next week. See ya.